This is the Watchdog office, where each week we'll be fighting your battles against bureaucracy, incompetence and unfair dealing. And Hugh Scully, who'll normally be sitting here, has been out and about to find out what's worrying you.
The British are a nation of cures. Without complaint, it seems, we wait our turn. Yet why? Because we actually enjoy it, or because it's convenient for someone else? Have you had to wait an unreasonable length of time recently for a bus, to buy a ticket, to see a doctor, or at a supermarket checkout? If so, write to us. We want to find Britain's longest queue. Then we can do something about shortening it. Indeed, if there's anything you think needs investigating, write to Watchdog. We want you to help us keep an eye on them.
Welcome to a very special and a very different My Virtual Jericho, another TV Legends session. 40 years ago today, or 40 years ago this year, Watchdog started off as a strand on Nationwide. It was 10, 15 minutes on an early evening tea time program. And that's all it was. My fellow Jericho resident, as I now have to call him, Bernard Clark, invented it all. He's here tonight. Bernard, how did it come about?
It's a very interesting story for me. I got married about a year before, and I'd been a reporter on Nationwide all the way, always somewhere in Britain, Northern Ireland, Scotland, whatever, but not at home. And with married life coming on, I decided I wanted to be based more in the office in London. So I literally invented an investigative unit. So it would mean I wouldn't have to be always on the road. I spent 255 nights on the road before that. So now the investigative unit meant I could be in the London office. That was the original genesis of it. And I actually have, John, the original proposal I wrote here. This I wrote on the 2nd of May, 1980. I sent it to Hugh Williams, who was the editor of Nationwide, and to John Gow, who was the person I really discussed it with most. For an investigative unit, it has all the things, the studio, and then going on the, going out and doing proper investigations. So that's the original document. And then, of course, what had been running on Nationwide until then was Pigeon Post with Gwyn Merslip, which was a kind of correspondence thing. And it was very soft. They actually had a pigeon and all this stuff. So the reason why we had the dog was because I had to take it from a very soft, audience reaction thing from Britain to a much tougher investigative unit. So I thought, make the title soft and then the program hard. So that was that. It was very fun, nice seeing it.
Well, there had been attempts before. I mean, Roger Cook had an attempt where he filmed his radio show, and John Stapleton had actually had an attempt at an investigative strand, had he not?
They had, but what they weren't, there were two things they weren't. They were single items in the main, and I'd have to argue about the veracity of a number of the items on the one with Roger Cook.
He's still alive.
I know he's still around, and he's, indeed, later, when I was doing dispatches for Channel 4, we investigated Roger and showed that, shall we say, there was a distance between fact and the way he turned over Arthur Scargill. And we doorstepped Roger, but that's another story. But he was not, shall we say, not only not popular, he was not, in my experience, trusted in the way that you'd expect a reporter or an investigative journalist to be across the whole thing of Nationwide, particularly by the then editor, John Gow. So there had been these investigative units, but they were single item, and what they weren't was based on viewers' letters. And what happened with Watchdog was we started it with that, and there was the thing that Frank Boff is showing. This was actually that went out before Watchdog started, because what we were trying to do was to get in letters. And after the first program went out, we got 50 letters, right? Which was not, they were pretty thin, there were dodgy plumbers and all this stuff. Then we did a second program, and we got like 100 letters. Then we did a third program, and we got like 250 letters. So it's beginning to gear up. And after the fourth program, we got 10,000 letters. So it went 50, 100, 250, 10,000. And you might think, wow, isn't that amazing? There are two things to that. One is there's such a pent-up need of the audience to write and say, I've been screwed, I've been, dealt with badly. But the second thing is, how do you deal with 10,000 letters a week? You've got to read them all. You do have to read them all, because you never know, that next letter might be the nugget. But you've also got to somehow acknowledge them all. So, and given that the Daily Mirror just turned over Jim Will Fix It, where they found 60,000 unopened letters in some rubbish bins in Hampstead that hadn't even been opened, and the BBC, you can imagine, we had to do the lot, right? And so there were only 4 of us then on the team, and we would take these things home in things like red boxes. We were like cabinet ministers. We take them home, and across the weekend, and literally, I wouldn't say we read, but we looked at every letter. And we had 4 cards of different colors. One was basically, thanks for your letter. It's very useful that you're a viewer. Second one was, we'll look into, there were different colors, the way we replied. But we couldn't obviously deal with them all properly. And then you'd have a little stack of letters that were really promising. And then every now and again, of course, you're reading a letter and you're going, this is a major story. This is, people are murdered, and they were writing the Watchdog. And so you then go into the office. The program went out on the Monday, and you go into the office, and the main program meeting was the first thing on Tuesday morning. And everyone would have their little pile of letters as to what you'd filleted from these big piles. And that absolutely was the bedrock of the program. It was like, it was interesting because listening to Hugh Scully, we want you to help us look into them or something, he says. But very quickly it changed, because that was my slogan. I invented it. We want you to help us investigate them. That was the whole thing. So it was like, we want you, i.e. the viewer, help us, the team of 4, 5, investigate them, which was, well, we know who them is. That was what was happening, and it was extraordinary. The most letters we ever got was 250,000 letters prior to Christmas in the first year, when we just announced that we were going to look into the holiday companies. And what happened was, it was hugely out of kilter with complaints against Intersun and Cosmos. Something like, so there were 250,000 letters. Let's say 200,000 of them were complaints. 180,000 were Cosmos or Intersun. The other 20,000 were other people. But Cosmos and Intersun actually did 15% of the holidays. So it was disproportionate. And so I had to persuade the BBC lawyers. Boy, did we have good lawyers. There were 2, Rory Robertson and Glendale Medico. They were so suspicious of me. They automatically, they wouldn't really, but we worked really well together. They were can-do lawyers. How do we get this on air? How do we get this on air? That was what they were always asking themselves. Now I'm afraid the lawyers in television are, oh God, they're not positive.
They're enablers rather than disablers.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, fantastic they were. But so then we persuaded them to actually say, given the proportions here, we can name those 2 companies as being whatever. And actually, I also remember that the Intersun they sent for the PR people, and they kind of bedazzled us and, and all this stuff. But Cosmos sent for the lawyers. And the managing director or the chief executive of Cosmos insisted, coming into the studio, doing 1 minute live. We'd only give him a minute live to rebut what we were saying. This was Hugh Scully would do the interview, but live. Not live on air, but recorded live. We couldn't change it at all. And this guy, and so we go, and then Hugh Scully goes, well, Mr. So-and-so, now you're going to rebut what you've seen, so what you've got to say. And he goes, he couldn't do it. And on about the 3rd attempt, I had to go down and tell him. And why was he unable to speak? Because what was in his mind was what the lawyers had been saying. You've got to say this, got to say that, and also it was lawyers. And from that moment onwards, I realized the key, the total key, was go with the PR men. If you're going on TV, actually throw the lawyers out the room and go with the PR men. And from that moment onwards, we did quite well. For instance, there was the Heinz Baked Beans School, whatever foundation. And what this said was, if you collect enough Heinz Baked Beans labels, you can get enough for a football. So 600 labels and your school would get a football. 13,000 and your school would get a canoe. And it was something like, I managed to come up with two wonderful phrases. One was, it was 1.3 million Heinz Baked Beans. If your school can come together and you can collect 1.3 million baked beans labels, then we give you a minibus. And I managed to come up with the line, my God, 1.3 million cans of baked beans. You could hear the fart in Manchester. And I still remember the bees going, yeah, that's fine, you could do that. Then and it was then Heinz had this slogan, this big thing saying, that's right. And I managed to switch it round. Heinz beans means, right? So it was like Heinz beans means, and it killed them. It totally killed them. And anyway, so they said, oh, you watch when this finishes in 4 weeks' time, we'll have given away loads of minibuses and all this stuff. Okay, I don't think so. Anyway, they stood by it.
But
and then 4 weeks.
Go on, finish off.
4 weeks later, I spoilt the man's day when I phoned him and said, so how many minibuses have you been given away, right? And he goes, can I get back to you? And I go, well, yes or no. He said, I'll get back to you, right? And then I got a call from Adele Biss. Now, Adele Biss ran Biss Lancaster, which was a big PR company. Very good they were. And she basically said, I knew her slightly. She said, Bernard, she said, how many minibuses do you run? I said, that means, Adele, you didn't give any away. She said, we only gave away 2 canoes, you know. So what happened was Watchdog managed to, so I then go and meet Adele for lunch, and she agrees that Heinz will donate 10 minibuses to schools of our choosing, or the audience is choosing, with petrol for 10 years and God knows what else. I mean, it's a lot of money's worth, right? I get back to the office, say, guess what? And they will go, you what? We've got 10 minibuses. And they go, 10? You should have been getting 20. You go back to Adele. This was the team that I employed, and we got 20 in the end. That's what we were doing.
Just back to the beginning. You didn't present. Hugh Scully presented. What difference did that make?
Well, Hugh was known as the Major, as you probably remember, John.
Why was he known as the Major?
Because he was very stiff, upright, had a rather plummy voice. Hugh's voice has changed over the years. I know he's dead, which is a shame, but he got less kind of county. But no thing. And what he did was he seemed rather sort of old-fashioned and whatever. And to be really frank, I fought against him being the presenter of Watchdog. I didn't know him, but when I say I fought, well, you know, I wanted someone else. But I was then threatened with Glenn Worsnip, who I liked immensely, but was totally wrong. So reluctantly, I accepted Hugh. And literally within 2 weeks, I knew he was the exact right choice. And I'll tell you why. Because he was a #1 first-rate journalist. I didn't know he'd never been to university. He'd spent his years from the age of 17 to about the mid-20s in Paris, because he spoke fluent French, working for the National Enquirer in America and all these dodgy sort of tabloid newspapers and God knows. This was Hugh Scully, but he was an amazingly brilliant journalist, which nobody knows even to this day. They think of him as the Antiques Roadshow and a rather plummy guy. No, he could sniff a story from a long way away.
Now let's maybe have a look at Scully in action. Maybe this little item about slimming pants, if we can.
And those are just some of the bargain offers on tonight's Sale of the Century.
And what about this as your starter?
Lose up to £8 in 18 hours, 7 inches in 17 hours.
A tempting offer, especially for many of us who are prone to a little overindulgence. Hetty Kennedy of Belfast couldn't believe her eyes. She immediately sent off for a pair of slumber trims as advertised. And this is what she got. Now, we're not sure if we have them the right way round, but either way, they were no good for Hetty Kennedy. She tried to contact the sellers, Swiss laboratories in Dublin, but she couldn't get hold of them, so she wrote to Watchdog. We spoke to a Mr. Pat Sweeney of Swiss laboratories. He said,
"There's been an error in our packing department. Mrs. Kennedy received the slimming shorts. They're a small version of the slumber trims."
well, we gave the garment to a leading London specialist in obesity. He said,
Is it an Irish joke?
no, it's quite serious. The claim is you can lose several pounds in just a few hours.
Rubbish. You'd get very hot and sweaty and maybe use a bit of water, but that's all.
So there's absolutely no chance of a large weight loss?
Absolutely none. By the way, how much does it cost?
Well, the larger slumber trim is £14.95 plus £1.05 post and packing.
It is an Irish joke then, isn't it?
No, it's not. And that was the opinion of our expert. So before you invest in this piece of rubber, we suggest you consult your doctor and see what he thinks.
Bernard, classic sort of consumer item, which is what you specialised in. Did you choose to do consumer stuff rather than investigate?
We did both. We followed the audience, and you could tell from the mail what the most interesting stories were. Those kind of stories. Well, and also bear in mind we had 15 minutes to fill on a Monday. I had a team of 4 plus Angela Laker, who was a trainee. And we had virtually, no resources. So we had to we threw in items like that in order to, get to the 15 minutes. And what happened with Watchdog was this: when we started, Mondays was the worst audience night for Nationwide. It was about 7.5 million. And it would get to sort of 8.5 million on Friday or whatever. And so Mondays was, and then after we'd been running Watchdog for about 6 or 7 weeks, the audience was going over 8 million on Mondays. But then there was this very rapid rise where by Christmas, it had gone from 7.5 million to 12 million. This was just this one, in my view, this one thing on Mondays that did this. And at that moment, everyone's going, my God, that's really audience building. And so it was. And so we started getting more resources and more people. And then we could start doing much, much more detailed and better investigations. But ultimately, the point, John, about investigations is that the best investigators are the public, as your viewers. You can send out huge teams of people, but actually, it's all these letters that were coming in the whole time. And one of the things that we used extra people to do was to be more analytical about this incredibly rich seam that Esther, who was doing That's Life, and that audience was going down and we were going up. And she never used the big audience of That's Life to investigate. They were all about odd-shaped potatoes and various other things like that. But once we started leading our audience with this is the kind of stuff we want, I would say the movement was quite strongly from consumer stuff into investigations. And it was still quite often consumer stuff we were investigating, but we just did a better job of investigating.
Was there any jealousy from Esther? I mean, you were both in the same department at that time. Did she try and kill you?
No, she tried to poach me. And if you remember, at that time, Ron Neal was running That's Life. He was brought in because Desmond had got rather too close to Esther. And and Ron was very, very keen to and you know what Ron was like. He was the kind of person who got in a bad sulk and mood if you didn't just say yes, of course, Ron.
Come and join me, Sonny.
Sorry, what?
Come and join me, Sonny William.
Aye, that's right. And don't say no. He was one of the few on the program that didn't have Oxbridge degrees like you've got, just like, so it was fine. But gradually so as I winched the seriousness of the program up, I would start no longer getting calls from Ron of That's Life. Roger Bolton of Panorama would phone me and say, I wondered whether you'd like to pop in and, have a coffee or whatever. And now their attitude is, I'm doing these investigations rather more. Maybe you'd like to come and join Panorama. But what I said to Roger was, Roger, it's all very well, but you're only getting 4 million, on a Monday evening, and I'm getting 13.5 million now. And, so there were all those conversations going on.
What were the highlights and the lowlights? Tell us about your experience with a well-known furniture company.
Oh, MFI. I don't know whether that was a highlight or a lowlight. So very briefly, it was really a way of getting the Advertising Standards Authority to actually tighten up. In those days, in magazines, there were all kinds of misleading ads. And of course, nothing happened. The ad had done its work by the time anyone complained. And it was just, who are the ASA? They were, Toothless Tiger is absolutely, they weren't even that. So we saw there were these ads that had been censored by the ASA against MFI. And it was, you can get this whole kitchen for £600. But actually it included, the photo included all the appliances and all this lot. And the ASA had come out with these things saying, this is a misleading advertisement, it should no longer be there. And I was reading the ASA reports. That Saturday, I was in bed and I opened some magazine. There's the ad. But this was 6 weeks after the ASA had said that this isn't. So we decided the right way to really put the pressure on the ASA was to give Hugh Scully, the major, £600, go to the North Circular MFI with a film crew and go in there with the £600, say, I want this kitchen here, the one in the magazine, this week's magazine. I have this kitchen, please. Oh yeah, well, and with all the appliances. No, you can't have that. Anyway, what happened was he did this. And the MFI sent for all these heavies. And they were quite heavy and big guys, and they come over, oh, what's going on? No, because we're filming all this lot. And the cameraman, Alex, what's his name, is still around. Anyway, so
Gurlis.
Alex, what?
Gurlis, I think he is.
Yeah. Anyway, so he lives in Bath now. But anyway, so he was then thrown through all these pot plants. Hugh Scully was pushed and shoved. And what happened was they pushed us out of the shop. Of course, I'm sitting back there thinking, I don't know about this. They're filming it all. And then what happens is they retreat. And then these MFI people come out and push them across more or less into the North Circular, right? What it was incredibly violent footage. It was really, really tough. So about an hour later, they come back from the North Circular back into Lime Grove and they go, come and have a look at this. And we look at it, and it's the most amazing footage. And we didn't really have to do anything. We hardly did an item, but it killed MFI because it was just so, and of course, we then put in the title sequences, everyone ran it, whatever and it was, so that was a kind of a low and a high or whatever.
That's the first Watchdog doorstep, was it not?
It was certainly up there. I mean, we did a lot of doorsteps, many, and but not like Roger Cook. My view of the Roger Cook doorsteps is probably defamatory, so I won't actually get into it.
It does rather start at the end and work backwards.
Yes, but ours were honest, and they partly because we didn't have some rather pompous reporter getting in the way. We there'd be people like Jamie Doran. I don't know if you remember Jamie Doran.
Yeah.
And even Mark Thompson, I think, once tried a doorstep. But and obviously, I did a lot of doorsteps myself. But the best one was, it was what was so wonderful about the MFI is that, of course, he was wearing a perfect suit and he had on a tie and he was busy. He was acting like someone. Excuse me, you take your hands off me, gentlemen. And it's like it was just so unlike anyone that had ever been doorstep before. And there was a doorstep I did in Coatbridge in
Scotland.
in Scotland, was the caretaker of a block of flats. And as we turn up there with the camera, this guy puts down his brush that he's brushing the thing, and he goes into the block of flats. We follow him. He goes into the lift. We follow him into the lift. And the doorstep is in the lift, right? I'm busy going, we're all looking at this thing going up to the 5th floor, And the idea of doing a doorstep, because the guy's retreated, and of course, he can't go anywhere because he's in the lift. We're in the lift. I'm busy saying, can you answer the questions, please? And then the door's open. He goes into his house. That's it. But so we had some great fun with all that lot.
What sort of reaction did you have to the MFI item from the public?
I wouldn't go and buy anything there, and just generally kind of. But MFI, as you probably know, not very long after that went bust. Because it wasn't. I actually quite liked it as a store. Actually, funny enough, I bought a whole load of kitchen doors there. I got them very cheap because no one else would buy them by then. But the fact of the matter is, it was a shall we say a company that didn't put the client or the customer first. I think you could say that. And
now you mentioned a minute or two ago some of your famous old boys and girls. One of them was currently locked away in his hideaway in Maine, and we managed to catch up with him. Here he is, Mark Thompson.
So, Mark, do you actually remember your first day on Watchdog?
So I can't remember what I did, but I do remember the program within a program, which is what Watchdog was, and I do remember the leading characters, of whom, of course, you were one.
I remember your first day very clearly. Shall I tell you briefly the beginning of the story? You arrived very fresh-faced, rather innocent looking, rather tall. And you said, hi, I've come to be your new trainee researcher on Watchdog. And you didn't look at that. I knew you didn't really want to be there. You wanted to be on the desk because that's the more exciting place to be. And that very morning, I had received a brown envelope with written on the outside, inside this brown envelope are all the receipts for a special celebration of the opening of the new sewage treatment plant in Worthing. Are you beginning to remember?
Very clearly now. Suddenly it's all come back crystal clear.
This was your first day. It was a Tuesday because the program went out on a Monday. And I gave you this brown envelope and I said, Mark, do you think you could give us like 30 to 45 seconds on the opening of the sewage treatment plant for the Southern Water Authority? And you look very unsure. Right, now you take up the story from there.
Well, so what's so interesting is in the way the memory plays tricks, I kind of, in my head, got it around to me, because that was obviously, that was a kind of fun thing. It was a fun item. In my head, that's played out. I must have been on Watchdog some time before that. That was day one. Well, what we did was it was. I mean, look, it was a classic story of public officials going overboard on wining and dining themselves. But the fun was, at least the way I saw the fun, was just in recreating the dinner. So we cotted up in the studio every aspect of Margot wine they drunk and all. Do
you remember? And then they washed it down with a little peas porter. Do you remember that line?
I do. And Hugh Scully was our presenter, a really great presenter. But Hugh looked like a bit of a bon vivant himself. So he had to have quaffed all this, no doubt, kind of Ribena rather than wine. He quaffed it like a real professional, and it worked very well as a piece. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll tell you. I'll go on with the story. What happened was you start on the typewriter. Remember typewriter, those 5 ways things where you would reel them in with the carbon paper between? Anyway, so you start on the typewriter, and then after about half an hour, you're beginning to type really quite fast. And then every now and again, I hear you laughing, right? You're chuckling away and you're laughing. This is the new trainee. They said he was a smart guy, but anyway, so as I'm going to lunch at 12:30, you hand me, I think it was 7 pieces of 5 ways, 7 sheets. I said, Mark, don't you remember I said somewhere between 30 seconds and 45 And you went crestfallen. You looked crestfallen. I said, oh my God, what are they sending us from the training pool these days? Anyway, so I said, I'll go to lunch. I'll read it after lunch. You know, I went off to lunch and I got back and I read your piece. And it was brilliant. However, it was 6 minutes long. Do you remember? and you had the idea of putting Scully in a deck chair with a... I remember this very clearly.
Yeah.
And then after that, what did you then go on to? Have you got any memories of really good items you did on Watchdog?
Well, I do remember one, because one of the things I wanted to do was to not be a researcher, but go out and direct pieces. And I remember another piece. I have to say, I'm a little hazy on what the piece was about, but going out with Helen Fielding, who subsequently...
You always thought you had a thing for Helen, by the way.
Or did she have a thing for me? Who knows? But Helen was I'd known Helen at university, and she and I went off to do a couple of stories together with her as a kind of trainee reporter, and me as a trainee director, with an extraordinarily grumpy film crew. An Ealing crew who really didn't want to be there. You know, if you were doing a doorstep, i.e. knocking on the door of the villain to get some live coverage of asking the difficult questions, you turn around and the camera operator was always changing lenses. So, you know, your moment of high drama and the kind of car driving off in a hurry with a person shouting at you had all been lost because we weren't quite ready to film at that point. But so I certainly remember that, and I remember also, to my surprise, I'd never read the books of Bridget Jones's Diary, but I did see the movie, and there's at least one scene in the movie when Bridget is working in TV, which looked, I thought, very much like Helen's and my adventures together, you know, years earlier on Nationwide. Yeah,
I know. It was an extraordinarily talented bunch of people there, you know, and including you and me. So what actually happened, Mark, is I can tell you this, probably I've already told you in the past, but you were kind of like, you were very, very good at one thing in particular. You could write fantastically good comedy scripts. You were absolutely brilliant at the sort of one-liner type comedy. But I always knew from more or less the first day you came, you wanted to go up on the desk. And you probably remember this, but after you've been with us for about 3 or 4 months, I sat you down and said, you know, Mark, I know you want to be actually on the desk because it's, oh, no, I love Watchdog. I love Watchdog, you said. I said, no, I know, Mark, you'd like to be on the desk, but let me tell you something. If you work on the desk, you do 4 11-hour days or 10-hour days or whatever, but that means you're free for the other day. I'll let you go to the desk, right? No, I love Watchdog. I'll let you go to the desk if you will give us on the 5th day, you'll come in and write the comedy scripts. Now, do you remember that?
It certainly sounds like you, Bernard. The idea of offering someone who's already got 44 hours of work to do every week, and the chance, the privilege of working on another day, which is meant to be their day off, by the way. So that certainly sounds like you, Bernard, the hard taskmaster, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. And from memory, you did indeed. You for until you went off somewhere else, you used to come and we would give you the stuff and you would rejig the scripts. And also you worked very well with Hugh Scully. I remember that.
No, I loved you, and I loved writing. And I've always loved writing. I've done it less in recent years. I do still sometimes. I've ended up, even at the New York Times, you know, wanting to write or to help someone else with a big piece of, you know, communication they've got to do. And I love writing in other people's voices. I'm quite fond of writing, you know, writing the kind of like lecture I'd give, but also the kind of lecture that somebody else would give. And I think the business of trying to understand the voice, I think it's quite an important part of writing is like voice and personality and trying to get somebody's voice. And I'd write different on Nationwide. I'd write very different scripts for Hugh than for Bob Wellings or Morley. So
yeah, they were really, really funny. And so I like to sort of think that your time with us was very well spent. But there is, as always, there is the final line, the kind of line where you go, so how do you sum up Mark Thompson's time on Watchdog? And this is how I would sum it up. Unfortunately, he decided that he wanted to go up into the hierarchy and be the Director General. And he then ran the BBC for 7 or 8 years, you know, and I suppose that has a purpose. But the world lost a very good comedy writer.
Thank you.
So, well, Mark, it's been wonderful talking to you across the oceans and that lot, and lovely going down memory lane with Watchdog.
No, it's been fun. Thanks, Bernard. Thank you.
Bernard, he went on somewhere rather high, and he did rather well, that boy. CEO of Channel 4.
We need him back. Yeah, we need him back. He was a serious. Mind you, you know, we mentioned Helen Fielding. You know, she was just down the corridor. Once asked me about whether I thought it was a good idea for her columns she was doing in the Independent to become a book. I remember her asking me that, and I said, well, I don't know, really, might do. You know, so there were so many.
It was a starting point, wasn't it, nationwide, for lots and lots of careers. People who've since become mega famous and mega rich.
Yeah, it was a great program. I really miss it to this day.
You did 18 months as editor Watchdog?
Yeah, I did, and then I mean I did a number of programs. So as it got more investigative, for instance, we did Wimbledon, you know, when we turned over the All England Club. And the main accusation against the All England Club, apart from having 8p gin and tonics for all the members there, was that there was only one person that ever got to the finals of the English, you know, the English person that got to the finals of the singles, Angela Buxton, who wasn't invited to be a member of the All England Club. And the reason was because she was Jewish. And I did all the research, and I really hit Air Chief Marshal Sir Brian Burnett, who was then the chairman of the All England. He did an interview because he thought, oh, this is the BBC and they've got the right to say they'll be all pleasant. No. Well, I did that interview personally, and I frankly destroyed him, but not because I'm clever, but because it was so corrupt what they were doing. And then they tried to stop this thing being broadcast. So Cliff Morgan and Jonathan, whatever his name was, the head of sport. Martin, that's right, came over and demanded to see this Watchdog special before it went out. And when they watched the stuff of this Sir Brian Burnett being destroyed because of their anti-Semitism, and rightly destroyed, they were going, we can't broadcast this. No, we'll lose Wimbledon. Oh my God, you know. So they then immediately tried to get John Gow, who's head of current affairs, to stop it. No. No. He said, look, this is current affairs, the equivalent of bugger off. So they went to see the managing director of BBC TV, one Bill Cotton,
who is Jewish. Was Jewish, yes.
He was Jewish, and that, you can imagine. He went, and actually Kate Adie, who was sat with Bill at the time, told me, yeah, they came in, and once Bill realised it was to do with that was it. But now what was happening also was that John Gow, head of current affairs, had decided that Watchdog had much more legs to it than That's Life. He'd never liked That's Life, and so I was going to be running it as a special program on BBC One, and Gow was going to become controller of BBC One. If you remember, he was nominated by Alistair Mill. But then in comes Mrs. Thatcher, the Carrickmore story on Panorama, and Gow doesn't get given the job, all entirely because of political pressure. Suddenly, my weekly special 45-minute Watchdog isn't going to happen. Roger Bolton's put in to take over Nationwide. I think that's the destruction. I like Roger hugely. He's a very serious and honest man, but he's not Nationwide. He's not tabloid. He didn't understand. I couldn't bear to watch the program I loved so much destroyed by this perfectly nice man. And so I then went off to Music and Arts and started Bookmark and Time Watch and helped run Omnibus for a couple of years.
But Watchdog went on to 37 series. You know, became in its own right, 37 series.
One thing, and the BBC need to be very, very careful in what they're doing with Watchdog now. One thing, which is Watchdog had this massive, important connection with its audience. The problem is they've lost that. I mean, they've done sort of that lifey crime watch type stuff. That's not what Watchdog's about. Watchdog is about giving the satisfaction to the audience of watching their cares and concerns, the things that they worry about, which is nothing to do with Westminster and politics, and it's not to do with most of the agendas of journalism. And Watchdog, by just simply getting those letters in there, it's so much easier. You just get emails and just do that lot. But and the Beeb's in danger of losing that connection. I know what they're doing, which is now wild, which is I think the program lost its way because it lost its connection with the deep cares and concerns of the audience.
We'll see a bit of it in the one show, but it got up to 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, under Michael Jackson, who loved it. Watchdog Holidays, Watchdog this, Watchdog that.
But I used to tell Michael when he went to then be head of Channel 4, when I was much closer to Michael, I used to say, but because he was trying to get something like Watchdog on Channel 4. But the problem with that, because they obviously asked me, and I always said the same. If this is not on BBC One, you don't have that amazing connection with that audience. Remember, we want you to help us investigate them. That connection is absolute gold dust. And the Beeb, of course, because almost all the executives of the BBC come from Oxbridge or come from public schools, and they don't have that connection. Esther, although she went to Oxbridge, she always understood the common audience, and that's what BBC One is about. BBC One is about those people, and the women in Rochdale who pay their license fee, and there are all these hugely overly compensated with their pensions guys back in London, mainly guys back in London. Now it's the old pensioners in Rochdale. It's the labourers up in the northeast. I'm not Dominic Cummings or whatever, but that connection we had, and bizarrely, Mark, who came with a silver spoon, he actually understood that, and Gal understood it, and to a lesser extent, Hugh Williams understood it. It's that connection with the real audience out there for BBC One, which is, that's what they need to. Now, the One show doesn't have it. The One show is a sort of semi-star show, can't work out where it's at. It doesn't really get out there. It's London-based. It's Metropolitan's attitudes, That's why I didn't have that. We interesting, Helen Fielding, she was a regional researcher, and that the BBC needs to get that connection with the regions and that connection with the real people back. And you get that by saying to them, write to us, you're the program. And so they were. Let's
have a look at where Watchdog has ended up as a strand once again on the One show. Let's have a little dip into that if we can.
Yes, coming up, some advice on how to avoid the staycation scammers. But first, the one thing that's really got me revved up this week is the DVLA, and here's why. Delays. Come on. Nobody likes delays. But now the roads are getting busier. Once again, we're coming to expect them. What you don't expect is the DVLA, which issues all of our driving licences, to be the ones holding all of us up. Come on! I'm not the only one with road rage. Lots of you are absolutely fuming at how long it's taken the DVLA, a government agency, to process licence applications. Catherine applied for hers at the start of May when she moved back to the UK after living in New Zealand. And she says without it, she can't get a job as a community nurse.
Thought, right, I'll be back driving within a month. Yeah. And it's been a disaster.
Bernard, is that your baby?
Not really. I mean, it's pretty good. It's a good story, that, and it makes me angry. and whatever. And indeed, they develop it a bit. But what they don't do is go and, if you like, doorstep the minister. There is a minister for transport, and they should be taken to account, because otherwise it's just like, some poor people. We all understand, DVLAs in Swansea and, COVID and all this stuff. It's not good enough. But and you follow that item all the way through, it's actually rather more scandalous than we've seen. But no, you've got to. So, for instance, Max Hastings and we totally changed the way that glasses are, the stuff you're wearing at the moment. And in those days, they cost a minimum of £40. Where I get the story, my mother, she suddenly needed some spectacles, £40. She goes, you could buy the same spectacles in Hong Kong for 50 cents. It's just like, what is going on here? So we looked into it. We discovered that there was this all the opticians.
There was a cartel.
It was a total cartel. A guy called Reg Pine was the ophthalmic director general, whatever, the trade union of opticians. And I remember him saying to me at the bar one day, he said, every week we keep it as it is a victory for opticians, i.e. every week our pensioners have to pay a bloody fortune. Anyway, we named Gerald Vaughan, the Minister for Health, as being me, and then Max was doing it in the Evening Standard. And we named him. Phone rings, literally, after he sees Watchdog go out. He goes, I get what you're saying. Can you pop in? We need to do this together, he said. That's why, and of course, Gerald Vaughan was the MP for Reading as well, but he was the Minister of Health. Now, what happened was I worked, he said, no, I'm not going to go on the record or anything, but this is what. And we changed the law, and suddenly now that's what you have to do in this. You have to engage the political process, not nicely, not like Andrew Marr. You hit them hard. And if they won't come on, and they won't, you put up a photograph and you say, this is the man responsible. DVLA, who's the minister? Well, the One Show doesn't do that, because the One Show it doesn't have that grit, that soft, it's too soft. That's fine, I understand, but the audience respond. They want to see the minute, they want the pillory, they want that, and they deserve it, because actually the fault is not with the DVLA, it's with the minister, it's with the Prime Minister. It starts there. And if necessary, they should be going and doorstepping on Boris. Because
so if you were doing Watchdog in the time of COVID now, what sort of stories would you like to investigate?
Well, it's so inept. I mean, obviously the whole way that the way the government has gone with COVID has been, but I wouldn't start that way. We'd have a little trail. We'd say we're going to do a special next week on Watchdog on COVID. If you've got something to say about that, please write into this address. And then literally 2 days later, you know what the program is. The program is not what I think it is. It's not what you think it is, John. It's what the people who write in. And if you get 100,000 letters, I guarantee you will know what's going on COVID. And that's what was so brilliant about BBC One doing this. It's like 13.5 million people we had. I think we got it up to 15 at one stage. But we had that many people. You're talking about 1 in 4 of the people you pass in the street are watching this program. They're responding into it, partly writing in there. Why? Because we're putting the world right by them. And what that means is not just tracing a bunch of crooked plumbers. It's about the banks. I mean, the way the banks are getting away with what they're getting away with at the moment, the way the government, in order to bring them to account, you have to bring the audience in. Because they're
so is Martin Lewis your successor, do you think? Money saving?
No, Martin Lewis's program is about Martin Lewis. He's not using all the mail and that. I mean, I used to write the scripts when it wasn't the comedy scripts that Mark was writing, I used to write the scripts for Watchdog. And I would tend to, not always, we often recorded on a Friday afternoon for the next Monday. And I would write the script on the Thursday night, i.e. I'd start about 6 p.m. and I'd have, the items and I sit down and I write this script. And by 3 a.m, when I'd finished writing the script, I would be angry. I'd be so angry, not proper, because of the way these people are being treated. But by the way our audience, it just, and if I wasn't angry, it wasn't a good program. I needed to be feeling these people have been so badly dealt with, treated, and God knows what else. And it's that sense of anger that as a journalist, you have to be extraordinarily careful with it, but it doesn't mean to say you reject it. It's like that's the purpose of consumer investigative stuff. None of this. Now, I'm not trying to say we didn't have fun.
Let's talk money. You were a member of staff when you invented Watchdog.
No,
you had the intellectual property to it. How much would that now be worth to you?
Oh, I hate to think. Now, I wasn't a member of staff, John. I refused always to sign a contract with the BBC because the BBC are not to be trusted. So there's the BBC, the spirit of the BBC. It's like the Catholic Church. You can be a Catholic and really care about Catholicism and say the church is terrible. The Beeb has all kinds. So I would never sign a contract. It doesn't mean to say the Beeb isn't the most wonderful, wonderful organization, because it's full of the most amazingly creative and committed and actually egalitarian people. They may have come from Oxbridge and been to public school, but most of them, it's extraordinary how there is that connection through BBC One to the people out there. My problem is it's not at the highest level. The bosses tend to be, they forget that the Northeast exists. That's why old Dominic's done so well.
Now, you've actually contributed your thoughts on the BBC, haven't you, to a new book? Perhaps you'd like to tell us how you see the future of the BBC.
Subscription, and the point is that subscription has always been. I think if the BBC got subscription right, then they'd make a lot more money than they get on the license fee. And of course, the person who's done it was Mark. Mark did it for the New York Times. What is it? He got 8 million subscribers or something?
More than that.
Is it more than that? I mean,
quadruple the share price.
And John, I've been watching what Mark did with the New York Times, and I'll tell you something. This is completely irrelevant to what we're doing. But on the other hand, I'm going to be in Jericho, so I can this is what I want to do. I believe that the next crisis point is local papers, and the reason is twofold. Local papers, their income was from cover price. They didn't get a lot, and advertising. They get nothing now. On the other hand, if you could do to local papers the same thing that New York Times has done, now the interest in journalism is very close to proximity, i.e., if it's something that happens around the corner from you, you're interested, very interested. If it's in your village, very interested. Your town, pretty interested. And local newspapers can use that to move to a subscription model. And I might well sit Mark down, because that's our next port of call.
The Oxford Mail is trying to do that, but perhaps you and I should set up the Jericho Bugle, some form of little website.
Jericho, I think what we've got to do, frankly, is take over. Papers that are failing now. When I say failing, they're losing loads of money, and we have to say, actually, let's move them to a subscription basis. And we've got 6 months or whatever, and we can find 101 ways to do that. And suddenly, out of subscription, in my view, the local press will rise, and of course, it will be a virtuous circle. And so, I mean, I'm very interested in what Mark did for the New York Times, and I think it can be done with the Oxford Mail. That might be just too big a scale. Where I am, also, I have a farm near Newbury. The Newbury Weekly News is on its last legs, but actually, the population of about 70, 80,000 around Newbury, they love the thing. But it was held up by advertising. That's all collapsed now, not just because of COVID.
Now you've also spend your weeks in Jericho.
Yes, I do.
Why did you move here, apart from the fact you're close to me?
Yeah, I was mainly to be close to you, John. Now I have 8-year-old.
And Hartwood Arms.
Yes, yes, indeed. I have 8-year-old twins, a boy and girl. And the best school for them by distance is a place called the Forest Farm School out at Islip. but it's too far to commute from Newbury. So we took the plunge and decided that's it. We're going to move to Oxford during the week, and we'll probably come down to the farm at the weekends. And but what I remember Jericho from my youth, but I'd forgotten. Well, in those days it was a fairly run-down place. Well, it was a very run-down place, but actually I'd forgotten what a beautiful place it is, how magnificent it is. And actually there's something also probably even more special about Jericho, which, which is the people of Jericho. What's interesting about them is they're so polite, they're so friendly. There's, I don't think there's anywhere in the world actually I've come across where there is a sort of sense of goodwill when you just walk down the street. It's not you're talking to people, you're not, but it's just a sense of, happiness or jolliness or something. I don't know if you find that. Do you find that, John?
I do, and I had a Watchdog triumph today, Bernard. The CCTV camera in the public square in Mount Place. The council wanted to move it. I stopped them today, using the local press and using people power. We just said no. This is a stupid idea. You get rid of it, bin it. You know what? It worked. They got rid of it. I mean, they got rid of the idea of moving it because it's transformed that area. So you're in Jericho for the next long time, I assume.
I figure 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. And I'd also, there's something very unique about Oxford itself. The city is a magnificent place. It always has been. It's got, it's somehow, but there is something very special these days about a place that on the one hand is very modern in its thought and in its approach to the world, but on the other hand has that sense of eternity to it, which is unusual. And so it's not impossible that you won't get rid of me ever now, that now we've discovered what a joy Oxford is and how well connected it is, and how, there are loads of weirdos like you there. Always entertaining. I noticed there was a little cafe I passed today on the edge of Walton Street, and there was a couple of people in there reading those things that used to be around called newspapers, and they were just 11 o'clock. They were having coffee and they were reading these newspapers, and I thought, where have I seen that before? And I realized I knew immediately, which was Dublin. Dublin was always a city where you could, in the old days, not now, in the old days, you could take a newspaper, go into a cafe and spend the morning reading it, and then maybe go and write a poem or a book or a play or something later. But the fact of the matter is, it's that sense that there are, really accomplished, busy people who will spend an hour or two in a cafe in the morning while they sort their brain out, reading something or the other. And I've noticed that about Jericho. It's something which in 2 years' time I won't notice because it will have become commonplace. But it's a very special place.
Very good. All right, we've had a most interesting and indeed informative hour. Just to let people know, next week, one of the new big developments in Jericho is a new humanities building right next to Bavadnik in the middle of the Observatory Quarter. Huge building, auditorium, everything else. The head of humanities at the university will talk us through that next week, and we will be asking questions about where the money came from. 150 million quid from a rather rich American. Bavadnik gave a lot of money for that. And then the week after that, what's that, Bernard?
Small change in Oxford, 150 million.
No, then the week after that, we're going to look at the future of the BBC with the former Master of Wellington, David Elstein, and a controversial look at the future of the BBC based on the book that Bernard's talking about. But meanwhile, let's perhaps go back to a little bit of the Watchdog title sequence.